Hey, hi folks. What you're listening to and hopefully watching here is an informal presentation about the elements of the research program that's ongoing to develop the next generation of the Canadian Forest Fire Danger Rating System. This presentation is focused on providing early information to those in the Canadian fire management community so that they can be aware of the changes coming and consider what that means to their own operations. It's meant to be informal. You will see that it's not highly produced. Um, we've been given presentations like this to individual agencies around the country, just to keep folks updated on where the next generation CFFDRS program is, and to engage with you all in discussions about some of the changes that we're planning. These have been useful meetings, and we want to keep engaging in them. This is some of that material essentially that we've been presenting over the last couple months and year, really, just to these individual agencies. We're just recording it here to make it available online so that we can reach a broader range of users. And I really do want to emphasize that. I mean, this is just a way to reach out and get a broader community engaged so that everybody's hearing a consistent message. We are still really happy to engage in individual sessions with agencies, talk about some of these changes and what they might mean for you, answer questions that you might have, that sort of thing. So do feel free to reach out to any of us on the fire danger group in the Canadian Forest Service, either directly or through your CFFC science rep. This presentation here that you're listening to right now is just a general overview of the next generation of the Canadian Forest Fire Danger Rating System. And there's another several of these presentations, hopefully on the same site that we have set up. Again, it's just an informal collection of presentations that we've been giving to users that go into a little bit more specifics. You should all be able to find, and hopefully are all aware of, this information report that we published in 2021 that gives a really broad overview of what the plans are for the next generation of the CFFDRS. It's freely downloadable from the websites that you see there, and it provides some of the rationale behind why we're making changes, and also provides various different summaries of what it is that we're planning in terms of the changes. Not the technical details behind them all, that's still yet to come, but really trying to give you a sense about what might be changing, what might be staying the same, and just provide that context for you. In this presentation today, I'm not going to provide a bunch of that rationale. I suggest you look back to that document and download that document if you want a larger history of both the danger rating system and some of our thoughts on that rationale. What I want to communicate in this short piece here, and it's something that we've been trying to get out, and as I say, and communicate to agencies. There is this. We are engaged in an overall revision of the CFFDRS, and this has been going on for some time, for most of the last decade, I would say. But we've really accelerated this program recently and have a target of finishing this version of the updated CFFDRS by around 2025, and having documentation available to the user community at that point. That doesn't end this program overall. I mean, I think we know we will have to engage in further knowledge exchange with all of our colleagues in the provincial and territorial fire agencies. That's going to continue on and ramp up once things have finished off in the development of the system here. The other side of it is science continues on. There are things that we will not be able to finish by 2025 that we think should be part of the danger rating system overall. And so you need to look at this as just an evolutionary step in the development of Canada's danger rating system. And you can think about the current CFFDRS that we're all using today as, somewhere around the fifth generation of that system. And it's been in development since the 1930s. So I want to talk just briefly about each of these sort of core elements of the system that you're familiar with and you use. And I want to start talking about inputs today, and just go over a few changes in inputs, specifically focusing on fuels. But our goal is to maintain a system that is very easy to use, and doesn't have at a baseline doesn't have onerous new data requirements. That's something that we're trying to achieve. At the same time, we are revising certain pieces of the system because we need to increase the flexibility for a whole range of users as well. And so that increased flexibility comes at a cost, essentially. And so those wanting to use that increased flexibility will perhaps need to understand some of the new broader input requirements. And we'll talk more about these in coming seminars here, and also we're happy to get together and talk with you about some of them. In terms of some of the revisions we're making are so that new data sources can be used within the system in a consistent and scientifically based way. And hourly weather data is a good example. So we're trying to increase the flexibility of the system so that all aspects of it, all parts of the system, can use hourly data that's available to most of the fire agencies in the country these days. We're also going to introduce methods that use solar radiation, since some weather stations are collecting that, and it can be shown to do a great job at improving the accuracy of moisture estimations in more open stands, in very exposed stands like grasslands, but also in more open stands, say in fuels treatments, which is something that is, of evaluating the effectiveness of fuels treatments in terms of fire behavior, is one of these things that is of great interest to pieces of the user community out there. Not to everybody, but to certainly to an important user base out there. We're also creating methods to estimate the conditions, the micrometeorological conditions in stand. The big one in forest stands, essentially. The big one of these is the wind in stand at the surface. We'll be using that to drive within stand surface fire spread models now, or at least an estimate of that. And so we'll talk more about that when we talk about the FBP system. We're also looking to find, again, a consistent and systematic way of using new information sources, new spatial weather sources, but also information from remote sensing, say the various greenness products that are out there that can assist with identifying, making observations remotely of, the timing of different phenological events in terms of vegetation, but also estimating things like the timing of snow melt or snow accumulation on the ground in the fall. So we want to be able to provide methods for using these tools. On the input side, the thing most people are interested in is the changes to fuels. And so to achieve the flexibility that we want in the fire behavior prediction system, we are more explicitly characterizing the attributes of the fuel complex. That's not to say that we're getting rid of fuel types and that users will have to know every physical detail about their fuel complex, such as the fuel loads or the depths of the forest floor organic layer, or the length of the crown, or the height of the trees, or the crown bulk densities. If you don't need to know that, you don't have to know that. Fuel type, a benchmark fuel type will have all of that information embedded within it. It will just be explicitly embedded within it. For those who do want to use that, who do want to say tailor their own fuel type to a specific situation, say a spruce stand that's been thinned, then you'll be able to adjust that information. That's the flexibility that I'm talking about when we talk about improving the flexibility of the FBP system. So our fuel types will be explicitly characterized in terms of the attributes that they have, those basic physical characteristics. And fuels in the new system are going to have an influence on spread rate. So surface fire spread rate, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be influenced directly by the in-stand wind, which is a function of how much drag is created by the canopy above the surface. And so the fuels that are there influence, and the stand density influences the amount of that in-stand wind. And so we'll have some simple models for that. We've already created these that seem to work fairly well. That just as an example of how fuels will be influencing fire behavior in the future. Obviously, fuel loads have an influence on fuel consumption and influence on then fire intensity. And so we will be developing models that specifically account for fuel load effects as well, and how they might influence spread rate or not, and how they influence the amount of fuel that's actually consumed in the passage of a fire. I want to emphasize this one piece that I talked a little bit about, but I really want to emphasize this center bit here. We are defining fuels in a more physical way, defining them by their physical characteristics, and a fuel type, a benchmark fuel type, like we have in the current FBP system, will be explicitly characterized in terms of these things. This will be completely invisible to you if you don't care about it. If all you want to use is the benchmark fuel type, then all of this stuff that I've just talked about doesn't really matter. The details of why we need to do this are all about the flexibility in the system, and creating a way to consistently change the fuel complex, and get realistic spread rate predictions from that. In previous presentations, when we've got into the details of what is the minimum set of fuel attributes that we need to measure out in a forest stand, we've put together this list as a bit of guidance around that. Again, if you're not out there trying to build your own new fuel complex and new fuel model that works within FBP, you don't need to care about these details. A good chunk of our fuels-based research program, which is ongoing right now, is going out and measuring these materials, figuring out how to take new measurement techniques from ground-based fixed plots to ground-based really detailed spatial LiDAR measurements, to aerial platform LiDAR measurements, to remote sensing based measurements of forest canopy, to link those all together and create information about these coverages across the country. So we have a research program that's focused on that, and lots of partners, in both academia and other parts of government focusing on that as well. So that's a major piece of the research program. Again, my caveat there when people get concerned about that is if you're a user of the system who just needs a small set of fuel types and the relationships between wind and moisture and weather, then you don't have to worry about that fuels characterization. The next piece of the system here is what we call the fuel moisture system. And those who know the system as it was conceptually laid out before, there was always this box that was the accessory fuel moisture system, where we loosely collected up the varied moisture, fuel type specific moisture calibrations, moisture models that sit outside of the FWI system core. And so what we're doing now in the system is just formalizing this a little bit more, committing to documenting this as we develop this next generation of the system, and committing to keeping this, this documented as a place where newer methods for estimating the moisture of different fuels in the forest complex can be housed, and if they're part of the CFFDRS. So let me just show you a conceptual representation here. And what I'm emphasizing right here is that the core moisture codes that everybody is familiar with in the FWI system, the liter moisture model that we turn into the FFMC, the F-layer Duff moisture model that we turn into the Duff moisture code, and the drought code itself are, they form the center of this, this fuel moisture system, but they also still exist in the FWI system. That's a little bit repetitive, but trying to emphasize that they're part of this moisture system, but they're, they also are obviously a core part of what is the FWI system overall. There are other pieces that, and most of these are in some state of development and testing and finalizing, really. So they're outside of these core pieces of the FWI system. There are ways to adjust the FFMC for stand-specific conditions to get a better estimate of liter moisture. There's a new grass moisture model for fully cured grasslands, be they matted grass in the spring or standing in the fall. There's a way we have developed of estimating the moisture content in exposed fine elevated fuels in the forest fuel complex. That all on the short response time end of fuel moisture, very quick changing fuel moisture. We're also working on different methods of estimating green up in different types of vegetation, be it grasslands, be it deciduous canopy. And so these will be more weather-based, seasonal specific models of live foliage moisture. At the far end, at the slower moving end, but an important piece is the availability of fuels in peatlands for extended smoldering, or the availability or the dryness of peatlands as an indicator of whether they form fire breaks or become just a connected landscape that fire can easily propagate across. But we'll be developing a fuel moisture index here that gives those users who are interested an indication of whether peatlands are available to smolder once ignition happens, whether they can sustain smoldering for an extended period. which may be of interest to some if they have large amounts of peatlands in their jurisdictions. Moving on, there are changes going on with the fire weather index system as well. This is something everybody is really familiar with and has integrated into their operational systems. The changes aren't huge. The core of the system stays the same, really. What we're doing is changing the inputs, and we're not changing what inputs we're using. It's still temperature and humidity and wind speed and rainfall. What we're doing is moving away from the classic 1 p.m. observation, which is what we've been using since about 1938, and moving to observations or forecasts, of course, of maximum and minimum values. So maximum and minimum temperature. So the daily, it's still a system that is keyed around the daily assessment of different aspects of fire potential. And in that regard, the core, sort of the baseline information need is daily weather. And so this now becomes daily maximum and minimum values of temperature, of humidity, of wind. There's lots of reasons we're doing that. There's another of these presentations where I'll go into some of those reasons in more detail. What this will let us do, however, is also let users who have hourly information flowing into their system, it will let them use that as the thing that they're calculating the FWI system with. The calculations will be consistent that way, which there's a whole bunch of benefits in that regard. The outputs will still be for the period of peak burn, as they always have been in the FWI system. Underneath, behind the scenes, what's going to be happening is that there's going to be hourly calculations going on, but the typical users doing daily planning don't need to see that unless they're really interested in, the result of a changing weather pattern or say a 2 p.m. rainfall that happened. That can now be incorporated directly into the system, and the subsequent drying that might happen through the afternoon into the evening can be more accurately accounted for. So the outputs are still for peak burn. There is a couple of additional outputs you can see on the side. I talked about this, on the slower moving side of the spectrum here, this peatland moisture indicator giving the user an indication of whether peatlands that are available for extended smoldering and smoke consumption and carbon consumption. On the faster moving side of it, in terms of drying, there'll be a specific pathway for grasslands as well. Very different structure, very different drying rates and spread rate functions than the standard pine type. And so we've decided to pull that outside and include that as part of the FWI system. It's an optional part of the FWI system, however. One doesn't need to calculate it or worry too much about it at all. It is something that is also greatly enhanced by a couple extra inputs, curing of grasslands essentially, but also solar radiation or even some basic estimate of cloud cover. A couple things just to highlight that, these changes that are happening to the FWI system, again, something that everybody is using across the country. We spend a lot of time thinking about the implications of these changes and aren't just making change for the sake of change. We're trying to solve some ongoing inconsistencies in the way the danger rating system overall and the pieces in the danger rating system work together. So there's a method to the madness of some of these changes, and they're not simply tweaking the system because we have the opportunity to do that. But a few of the things that we want to make sure we maintain, the simplicity of the interpretation of the system and its calculation. This is an important piece in terms of the success of the system. Keeping the calculation of the system, the use of the system as at a baseline daily. That's always what the system has been, and so we want to keep the system as this daily system, using now max mins instead of the once a day observation of weather. But underneath the hood, and if users are interested, what will be happening is the calculations will be going on hourly. Doesn't mean that for some decision-making needs, one would want to look at the hourly data, but it does provide the best feeding the hourly data directly into the system would provide the best characterization of the true diurnal patterns that were happening on any particular day. We want to make sure that the output is still for peak burning. Again, thinking to how the FWI system and its outputs are used in daily operational planning. This is what we're mainly trying to think about. Again, behind the scenes, all of these outputs of the FWI system are going to be calculated on an hourly basis. Even the drought code, as absurd as that might be, given how slowly it changes, will be being calculated on an hourly basis. And last but not least here, what we wanted to do is make sure that in changing some of these, making some slight changes to some of the models, that we're not changing the absolute values of the system. And so what you have as your mental model of what an FFMC of 92 represents will still be true moving forward in the new system when you get an FFMC of about 92. We want to maintain that as much as possible and not make wholesale changes in what the codes are giving you. What does this mean? Again, this is an important one for agencies. So just to spend one more minute on this, there's a bunch of changes. That are the bunch of implications for the operational agencies. There's technical IT type issues in terms of getting weather into the system and the timing of calculations. Those are simple enough to deal with, but they need to be considered. I don't think there's much of an implication for planning. I'll talk more about that in the next more detailed lecture on the FWI system itself. But and there's a couple further of these recorded webinars about inputs and outputs. But I don't think from a planning perspective there's all that much of an implication. From the decision support system point of view, there may be interesting tools that can now be incorporated. Obviously, you can use hourly data that you have been collecting. You can also use the timing of rainfall and put the timing of rain events in when they occur, essentially. And so you can now look at the effect of partial days of drying if rain occurs at noon or just after 1 p.m. And obviously, there's implications on the training side of things and how the system might be interpreted. Again, we're trying to keep the absolute values of the outputs of the system around the same values that they were before, and we're testing that. That's one of the things that takes a while. But I think some of these aspects of trying to more explicitly capture the diurnal structure of the day by requiring the inputs to be at the bare minimum max and min temperature and RH and wind is an easier thing to understand than this how things happen from this 1 p.m. observation. And last but not least, there may be it may be advisable for each of the agencies, and we're certainly willing to help with this, to revisit, their class of their FWI system adjective class ratings, the low, moderate, high classifications, and those thresholds between them that they use. We've started this. We did a bit of a case study providing a new way of doing this in Ontario. Ontario was looking to revisit their classifications anyways, and I think most agencies have not revisited these for decades, and so it's not a bad idea to get back to this anyways. And so this documentation or this information report here, where you can see the link. This describes some of this work that we just recently did in Ontario that we hope to build upon and translate into some guidance for you and the agencies who might be looking at this, revising classification thresholds down the road. There's not an immediate need to, it's probably a good time to think about this, given that we're making some small changes in the system overall. And moving on to changes in the fire behavior prediction system overall. So the basic core of the FBP system, and this, again, what we use today could very much be shown as, this conceptual diagram here. In the green boxes up at the top, these are the inputs that we use today. And the core of the FBP system, spends time thinking about, is there, are we crowning, and what's our rate of spread, and what's our fire type? Are we in a surface or intermittent crowning or crown fire type? We do this sort of a breakdown in the current FBP system. In this next generation of the FBP system, that core structure remains the same. We are making a number of the relationships that were always hidden behind and implicit in the system. We're making these explicit. But all of these little boxes in the gray part of this, this larger box are things that can be hidden. They're more advanced features of the system that typical users don't need to know about. But they're all pieces that are making this enhanced flexibility work. And so some users may want to get into the details of some of these, the explicit characterization of physical fuel attributes. I have this in a red box here just to emphasize that, again, users will still be able to use fuel types if that's what they want, and ignore all of this stuff in the gray boxes here. In the core piece of the system there, we see on the far left, ignition sustainability. So these are new models of sustainable flaming ignition. There have been models like this around for a number of years. Even the data on which they're based goes back to the very start of fire research in Canada, really. So we have redeveloped these models using, some of these to be consistent with our new stand-specific moisture estimators and in-stand wind models. And also, and this is important, to have the ignition sustainability models be consistent in form with the new surface fire spread models. And so they can be used together, and their outputs can be looked at side by side. And they both depend on, at a core, they depend on the same attributes, essentially. There's a lot of different ways that we're getting at that enhanced flexibility. That's a series of these seminars in itself, and we'll get around to talking about that. I just wanted to go over that. That is very much a work in progress. I want to talk really briefly about applications as well, and just give a quick note that there's lots of applications where we work with people, fire growth modeling, and they're not core pieces of the danger rating system, but there's a few applications that are core outputs of the danger rating system that we want to assure people that, despite some of the added flexibility and the complexity under the hood of the system, one will still be able to make these things like red book tables for fire behavior prediction, or even simple charts of the wind rate of spread relationship. These are all still going to be output products, applications. Things like the Red app, be it a phone app or the desktop app. There's nothing in the complexity of the system that will prevent us building those things for you and with you in some cases. So just to it's easy to worry a bit about some of this increased complexity of fuel characterization, and will that lead to not being able to have simple red book pages anymore? And I want to really emphasize that's not the case. And we are thinking about these primary applications that users want to have. So just really to sum up quickly here on some of that stuff, we're trying to make sure that the FBP system and the danger rating system overall remain simple to use, and that these enhanced flexibility in the system that say may allow things like fuels management and fuels thinning treatments to be evaluated, that they are done with there's a set of models within the system that provide a way to systematically and consistently do that, modify fuel types and get a good scientifically sound rate of spread model from that for a new fuel complex. So, when we talk about the FWI system, we still want to make sure, in terms of its simplicity of use, that the daily use is a core piece there. Though those of you who want to feed your hourly data into it can do that, and it is consistent with the daily system. There will be standard fuel types like there are today in the FBP system, but all of this flexibility that we're talking about and these changes deep under the hood of the models will allow modification of those fuel types for specific situations. And the obvious example to give is around fuels management, thinning, say pruning, and the effects of those. We'll be able to evaluate those in a physically logical framework that is consistent with the standard fuel types in the FBP system. So one last word, I just want to remind you, this is just an evolutionary step in the development of the danger rating system overall. And, there is a long legacy of, this system evolving with time to try to meet fire management needs and new data availability. And that's what we're trying to achieve here, to allow the new system to be able to use data that you have at your fingertips today, or to address those questions that you need scientifically sound, evidence-based answers for.